So the next topic is education and the awareness in the conservation. Education and awareness program are critical component of biodiversity conserving efforts, which aiming to inform and engage the individual, communities and stakeholders in understanding the environmental issues. It also helps in promoting the sustainable practices and fostering the conservation stewardship. These programs include the school education initiatives, public campaign, and their impact on increasing knowledge involvement in the conservation efforts. If we are talking about school education program in school education, integrating environmental education in the school curriculum, introduce students to the biodiversity, ecosystem, and sustainable development principles from an early age. So, environmental science courses in high schools cover topics such as habitat conservation, species diversity, and the climate change impact on the ecosystem. In that case, the field trip, nature walk, and hand-on activities allow students to observe local biodiversity, understanding the ecological process, and appreciate the importance of the conservation. Students participate in tree planting events and wildlife monitoring projects, connecting classroom learning with the real life world conservation actions. And student led club and promote the project environmental stewardship, organize the community cleanup, and advocate for sustainable practices in school and the neighbor. If you are taking the example of school education, Eco School program in Europe engage students in sustainable audit, energy conservation initiative, and waste reduction campaign. Okay, next one is public campaign. Public campaign use media, social network, and the community event to raise awareness about the biodiversity laws and the conservation challenges and including um, individual actions for the sustainability. Earth Day campaign promote recycling, energy conservation, and habitat protection through the social media hashtag and public event is the example of the public awareness campaign. Collaborative initiative involve NGO, government agencies, business and media outlets to amplify messaging, reach the diverse audience and foster the collective actions. And conservation organizations partner with celebrities and influencers to advocate the wildlife protection, climate action, and the sustainable lifestyle. Campaign encourage the behavior such as reducing the single use of plastic and supporting the sustainable product and participating the citizen science initiatives. So it also increase in the knowledge, okay, knowledge and involvement in the conservation. Education program deepen public understanding of the value of biodiversity threats to the ecosystem and the role of conservation in maintaining the ecosystem services. Workshop on invasive species educate the communities about the impact on the native habitats and strategies to prevent and control. Okay, increasing the scientific literacy empowers the individuals to engage in informed decision making, support the evidence-based policies, and advocate for the conservation priorities. Public lectures by the scientists explain the research finding on climate change and impact on the wildlife population and the habitat. So, awareness program encourage the participation in the conservation activities such as wildlife monitoring, habitat restorations, and the community-based conservation projects. Birdwatch event in urban park promote the bird conservation and contribute data to the citizen science platform like the eBird. Okay, inform citizens, advocate for policy that protect the biodiversity, promote the sustainability, develop and allocate resources for the conservation initiatives. In that case, advocacy campaign support the legislations to designate marine protected areas and conserve the endangered species habitat and mitigate the human wildlife conflict. If we are talking about the challenges and considerations while implementing the biodiversity concern on education and awareness, so then behavior change, access, and the equity measuring impact. These are all the challenges and consideration. Okay, overcoming barrier to behavior change require the sustained education, community engagement, and incentive for adopting the sustainable practices. One should ensure to inclusive access to education and awareness program, support drive participation, and address the social disparities in the environmental stewardship. Evaluating programs effectiveness through the monitoring, evaluation, and feedback, information, adaptive strategies, and improve the outreach outcome. So, the education and awareness program are important in fostering a culture of conservation, empowering empowering the individual and the community to take action and influencing the policy decision to protect biodiversity and promote the sustainable development globally. By increasing knowledge, changing attitude, and promoting the collective responsibilities, these programs contribute to preserving the ecosystem, enhance the resilience to the environment challenges, and securing a sustainable future for our generation to come. Yes. Next one is research and monitoring in the biodiversity conservation. Research and monitoring are the fundamental component of biodiversity conservation efforts and providing the essential data that insight into a species ecosystem and the impact of the human activities. These activities include biodiversity studies to understand the species and the ecosystem and monitoring the program, and it also aimed at tracking the changes and assessing the impact over the time. So, in that, the biodiversity study, understanding species and the ecosystem, taxonomic study, identify and classify species, providing the foundational knowledge for the conservation assessment, species distribution mapping, and the genetic diversity analysis. DNA barcoding technique help differentiate between the cryptic species and the assess genetic variations within the population. And if we are talking about the ecological research, ecological studies investing the species habitat, preferences, resources use, and interaction with the ecosystem, informing the conservation strategies and the land management practices. In that, the radio telemetry track movement on large mammals like the wolf to identify the critical habitat corridors and mitigate the human wildlife conflict. Research on ecosystem and research on ecosystem process such as nutrient cycling, pollution dynamic, and the predator-prey relationship educates the ecological interaction on the ecosystem services. Okay, pollinator studies assess the role of bee and the other insect in agricultural productivity and the wildlife diversity. So, highlighting threats like habitat loss and pesticides used should be in the awareness program. And genetic studies assess the population structure. Okay, population structure and the adaptive trait, guiding conservation breeding programs and enhancing the species resilience to the environment change. Conservation genetics use the microsatellite market to assess the genetic diversity and connectivity in the fragmented population of the endangered species. And the research tracks species response to the climate change, predicting the range shift and adaptation strategies to inform the conservation planning. Phenomenological studies monitoring timing of the plant flowering and animal migration in relation to change in the climate pattern, guiding the habitat restoration and protected area management. Okay, so next one is the program monitoring program tracking changes and the impacts. Monitoring program track the population size, trends, and the demographic parameter of species to assess the conservation status and the population viability. In that case, the bird branding and the census survey monitoring the avian population, detecting decline due to the habitat loss, population, and the climate change. Habitat monitoring assess change in land use, habitat fragmentations, ecological integrity, identify threats, and prioritizing the conservation action. These are all the habitat assessment. Okay, remote sensing technology map forest cover change and the deforestation rate in the tropical region, informing the policies to combat the illegal logging and the land conservation. Okay, uh, in that, if we are talking about the threat assessment, then monitoring program detect and manage the invasive species, minimize the impact on the native biodiversity and the ecosystem sustainability. Early detection network monitor for the invasive plant species like the Japanese notepad and implementing rapid response protocol to prevent and establish and spread. Okay, monitoring programs assess the water quality, air pollution level, and the soil contamination, identify the sources and mitigation the impact on the ecosystem and the wildlife. Okay, water quality monitoring in the freshwater ecosystem track the nutrition, loading, and the chemical pollutant, supporting restoration efforts and aquatic biodiversity conservation. So, engaging volunteers in data collection, such as species sighting and the environmental monitoring, enhance the spatial and the temporal coverage of the monitoring efforts. In that case, we see the example of the great backyard bird. The great backyard bird count involved participants worldwide in recording the bird species and the abundance, contributing to the global avian biodiversity database. So, if you are talking about the data integration and the management system, in that the spital analysis, geographical information system integrate the ecological data, habitat map, and the landscape feature to prioritize the conservation area and monitoring the habitat connectivity. Habitat sustainability model predict species distributions under future climate scenarios, guiding the adaptive management strategies in protected area. Okay, if we are talking about the challenges and considerations in data integration and management, the first one is the data quality and the standardization, capacity building, adaptive management. Okay, so ensuring the data accuracy, consistency, and the compatibility across the across monitoring programs, support the robust scientific interference and policy decision making. Okay, building technical expertise and infrastructure for research and monitoring in the developing region, enhance global conservation efforts and address the knowledge gap. Integrating research funding into adaptive management framework improve the conservation outcome and resilience to emerge threats like the disease outbreak and the habitat fragmentation. So we can say that research and monitoring play a important role in biodiversity conservation by advancing the scientific understanding, informing evidence-based management practices, and empowering the stakeholder to make informed decisions for the sustainable development and ecosystem resilience. And these efforts contribute to safeguard the biodiversity, mitigating the impact and securing the natural resources for the future generation to come. So these are some success stories in the biodiversity conservation. Conservation efforts worldwide had led to the several notable success story in the species recovery and the ecosystem restoration. In that the effectiveness of dedicated conservation strategies, collaborative efforts, and the public support. So now here are some example of these success stories. First one is the Black Eagle. The Black Eagle, a symbol of United States, fears the severe population decline due to the habitat loss, hunting, and the pesticide poisoning. So the Black Eagle Protection Act 1940 and banning the DDT in 1970 provide the legal safeguard and reduce the toxic threats. Restoration of the wetland and which is habitat crucial for the habitat nesting and the foraging. Captive breeding and reintroduction program in key habitat contributed to the population recovery. So, if you are talking about the outcome of the Black Eagle conservation program, the Black Eagle population rebounded from a few hundred pairs in 1960 to 70,000. Okay, in 2007. Second one is the giant panda. The giant panda, iconic to the China biodiversity, face the habitat fragmentations, bamboo loss, and poaching, resulting in the decreasing their population. So, the after the efforts led to the significant increase in the giant panda population with a 17% raise in the wild population from 2004 to 2014 and promoting its downlisting from the endangered species. Okay, uh, Everglade restoration. The Florida Everglades, a unique wetland ecosystem, suffered from the water diversion, habitat fragmentation, and the invasive species. So, the restoration of natural water flow and the food plains connectivity to improve the water quality and the habitat sustainable. After that, removal of invasive plants and restore the native plant communities. Partnership among the federal and the state agencies, trips, and the stakeholders to implement the restoration project. So these ongoing efforts have improved the water quality, restored the wetland habitat, and supported the recovery of native species like the America crocodile and woodstock, which is in the decreasing rate and harmful for the ecosystem health and the resilience. Lake Ontario Atlantic Salmon Restoration Canada. In that, the Atlantic salmon population in lake declined drastically. due to the habitat degradation, population, and the overfishing. So, population monitoring indicate an increase in uh, the salmon with the successful nature reproduction observed in the restored habitat and highlighting the effectiveness of habitat restoration and the collaborative conservation efforts. Now, if we are talking about the key factor contributing to success, first one is the multidisciplinary approach, second one is the adaptive management, and third one is the public awareness and the support. Integration of ecological research, habitat restorations, community engagement, and the public or the policy support. Flexible strategies that adjust to the new information and changing the environmental conditions is also an important part which contribute in the success. And education campaign and stakeholder involvement fostering the conservation ethics and the sustainable practices. So, these success stories demonstrate the potential of the species recovery and ecosystem restoration through the concerned conservation efforts, which put an emphasis on the importance of collaborative partnership, adaptive management, and the public engagement in achieving the positive conservation outcome. These achievements provide inspirations and lessons for addressing the ongoing biodiversity challenges today. Now, challenges in the conservation. Conservation efforts face number of challenges and require the strategic approach and collaboration to overcome. Okay, if you are talking about the main challenges, including that is funding constraint, the need of political will, and managing the human wildlife conflict with the balancing conservation goal with the local need. So, first one is finding needs and the financial resources. Funding needs for the financial resources. Conservation projects require the substantial financial resources for research, habitat restoration, monitoring programs, and the community engagement initiatives. And securing fundings from large scale projects such as establishing the marine project area, protected area, or implementing the species recovery plan often depend on the government grants, private donation, and the international funding agencies. Sustainable financing models such as endowment, public private partnership, and ecotourism revenue are essential for maintaining the conservation efforts beyond the initially project phase. Okay, so conservation organization often seek innovative funding source like carbon credit or biodiversity offset to financing the ongoing operation and expand the conservation impact. Disparities in the funding availability between the developed and developing regions can hinder the conservation efforts in biodiversity and rich but economically disadvantaged area. Capacity building initiatives in international collaborations aim to bridge funding gap and support the local conservation efforts to the resource in the limited region. And the next one is political will. In that, the importance of the government support. Strong legislative framework and enforcement of the environmental laws are critical for protecting the biodiversity, regulating land use, and mitigating threats like the habitat destructions and the wildlife trade. The establishment of national park, wildlife reserve, and protected areas rely on the government to commitment to conservation goal and sustainable development. Multilateral agreement and the conventions such as the Convention on the Biodiversity and Paris Agreement on the Climate Change facilitate the global conservation efforts and promote the shared responsibility. Okay, ratification and implementation of the international treaties require the political will and the diplomatic cooperation to address the transboundary conservation challenges effectively. Advocacy campaign and the public consultations foster the public awareness, promote the conservation ethics, and influence the policymaker to prioritize the biodiversity conservation in the natural agendas. Okay, grassroots movement and the petitions mobilize public support for legislative actions on crucial conservation issues like deforestation and endangered species production. Next is human wildlife conflict, balancing the conservation of the local need. Conflict arises when the wildlife habitat overlap with the agricultural land or the grazing areas, leading to the crop damage. Livestock livestock predations and the economic loss for the local communities. In that, implementing sustainable land use practices like wildlife corridor and the predator-proof fencing, mitigating the conflict and support coexistence between the human and the wildlife. And indigenous communities and the traditional practices may conflict with the conservation object, requiring the respectful engagement, negotiation, and the recognition in the cultural right. Collaborative conservation initiatives involve the indigenous knowledge and the customary practices in the resource management, promoting the cultural diversity and the biodiversity conservation. Stakeholder dialogue, conflict meditations, and the compensation mechanism are essentially for resolving the dispute, building trust, and ensuring the equitable outcome from the affected communities. So, conflict resolution strategies include the community led initiatives, adaptive management, and the conflict sensitive conservation planning to address the local concern and support the conservation goal. If we are talking about the challenges, yes, uh, collaborative approach involving the government, NGO, local communities, and the private sector facilitate the resource mobilization, leveraging expertise and enhancing the conservation impact. Building technical skills, empowering the local stakeholder, and fostering the institutional capacity strengthen conservation efforts to promote the sustainable development. Okay, flexible strategies that adapt to changing environment, social and economic conditions, ensure the resilience and effectiveness in achieving the conservation objective. So we can say that addressing challenges in conservation require concerned effort to secure finding and mobilize political support and managing the human wildlife conflict while promoting the sustainable practices and community engagement. By addressing these challenges collaboratively and innovatively, conservation initiative can achieve lasting impact for the biodiversity and the ecosystem. Next is the global conservation effort. Efforts on the globe scale are essential for addressing the biodiversity loss, habitat degradation, and threats to the wildlife. So, some important key international agreement and the initiative by the crucial initiative play a crucial role in coordinating the conservation actions, monitoring species status, and regulating the international wildlife trade. So let's discuss these points. First one is convention on the biodiversity. We had already talked about this. The CBD established in 1992 in the Rio Summit. It's an international treaty. It is an international treaty aimed to promoting the sustainable use of the biodiversity conservation of the biological diversity and equitable sharing of benefit derived from the genetic resources. Okay, now what is the objective of CBD? Convention of the biological diversity. It helps in promoting the conservation measures such as the establishment of protected area, habitat restoration, and sustainable management of the biodiversity. It also helps in encourage the sustainable practices in agriculture, forestry, fisheries, and tourism to minimize the biodiversity loss. And it helps in addressing the fair and equitable sharing of the benefit arise from the utilization of genetic resources and uh, emphasis on the right of the indigenous and local communities. Okay, if you're talking about the implementation, the countries develop and implement the national biodiversity strategies and action plan to meet the CBD objective at the national level. Okay, CBD set goal biodiversity targets such as the RG biodiversity targets 2011 to 2022, 20, and the post 2020 global biodiversity framework to guide the conservation efforts and measures progress. Uh, if you are talking about the challenges which CBD are facing, so CBD has facilitated collaborating among the countries. Okay, supported biodiversity research and monitoring and raise awareness about the biodiversity conservation globally. But implementation gap, finding or funding storage, and emerging threats like the climate change and invasive species continue to challenge CBD effectiveness in the habitat or in halting the biodiversity loss. Next one is IUCN Red List of the Threatened Species. Managed by the International Union for Conservation of Nature, the Red List assesses the conservation status of the species worldwide, providing the information of the extinction risk and guiding the conservation priorities. Okay, so in that uh, extinct criteria, if you're talking about the category, extinct, no known individual remaining, extinct in the wild, survive only in the capacity, critical endangered, vulnerable, facing high, very high, and the high risk of the extinctions, and near threatened, likely to become threatened in the near future without the conservation actions, least concern, widespread and abundant species not currently threatened. So these are all the categories. Uh, now, species are assessed. If we're talking about the assessment, then the species are assessed based on the population trend, distribution, habitat status, and the threats using the standardization criteria. Regular update and reassessment ensure the red life reflected the latest conservation status of the species worldwide. Okay, uh, guiding priorities of the species for the conservation actions and allocation the resources, inform the policy decision and international agreement and the conservation funding priorities based on the extinction risk assessment. Okay, if we are talking about the implement and the challenges which faced by the IUCN Red List of the threatened species, that the Red List has become a global standard for assessing the species extinction risk, support the conservation planning and the advocacy effort worldwide, but the data cap, the limited species assessment, and evolving threats required continuous update and improvement in species monitoring on the conservation strategies. Next one is last one, that is the Convention of International Trade in the Endangered Species of the Wild Fauna and Flora. Okay, CITES adopted in 1973 regulate the international trade in wildlife and plant species to ensure that their survival is not threatened by the unsustainable exploitations. Okay, if we are talking about the objective, the control international trade through the permit system with the species listed in the three appendices based on the conservation status and the trade regulation. Okay, ban on restricted trade in the species threatened to the exchange, ensuring the sustainable trade in the species not at risk. Facilitating cooperation among the member countries to combat illegal wildlife trade, enforce the regulation, and promote the conservation measures. Okay, so if you're talking about the implementations and compliances, member companies, member countries implement regulations through the national legislations and enforcement agencies. Okay, cities secretariat monitoring trade trends, compliance with the regulation, and provide the technical support to the member countries. Cities has contributed to recovery of the species like the African plant and certain big cat species, yet challenges remain in the addressing illegal trade, ensuring the effective enforcement and adapting to the emerging conservation threats. So, global conservation efforts under the CBD, IUCN Red List, and the cities play a crucial role in safeguarding the biodiversity, regulating the trade in the endangered species, and promoting the sustainable development worldwide. These initiatives rely on the international cooperation, scientific research, and the political commitment to address the biodiversity loss and ensure a sustainable future for ecosystem and species diversity globally. Yes. If you are talking about the call to action for biodiversity conservation, first one is individual action, community effort, and the global cooperation. Conservation biodiversity is collective responsibility that require the action at the individual, community, and the global level. Each level of engagement play a crucial role in protecting the ecosystem, species, and the natural resources for the future generation. So let's discuss some actionable steps for the individual communities and global cooperation in the biodiversity conservation. First one is at individual level, reduce, reuse, recycle. In that, minimize your ecological footprint by consuming less and choosing the sustainable product. Okay, reuse and repurpose. In that, opt for reusable item instead of the single-use plastic and support the product made from the recycled material. Okay, in recycling, short and recycle waste property to conserve the resources and reduce the landfill waste. So, in that, contribute financially to donate your time to local and international conservation organization and raise the awareness about the biodiversity issues, support the policies that protect the wildlife and the habitat, and participate in the advocacy campaign. Reduce the energy consumption at home and support the renewable energy initiative. Conserve water by fixing leak, using the efficient appliance, and practicing the water-wise gardening. Choose sustainable source food product to reduce the ecological impact of agriculture and the fish. If you are talking about the community effort, In that local conservation project in the local reforestation, wetland restoration, and urban greening project to improve the local biodiversity. Okay, establish community gardening or gardens or green spaces to support the native plant species and provide the habitat for the wildlife. Okay, in that case, engage in the citizen science initiative to monitor the local biodiversity and track the wildlife sighting and contributing data to the research project. Advocate for the environmental education in school, promoting the awareness of the biodiversity, conservation issues, and sustainable living. One should organize or community should organize the workshop, nature walk, and the environmental events to educate the community members about the local ecosystem and conservation practices. In collaborative principle, collaborate with the local business, NGO, and the government agencies to implement the sustainable development project and conservation initiatives. Okay, community engagement in that foster the community engagement through the participatory decision making process and inclusive the conservation planning. Next one is global cooperation. In that, uh, advocate for the strong implement of the agreement or the convention which we are studied in the last slide. Okay, promote the cooperation between countries to address the cross-border conservation challenges such as the habitat fragmentations and wildlife trafficking. Support the international research collaboration to enhance the scientific understanding of the biodiversity and ecosystem dynamic. Share the biodiversity data and research findings globally to inform the conservation strategies, monitoring species trends, and identify engaging threats. Okay. Advocate for the policy that integrate the biodiversity conservation into the broader sustainable development agencies or agendas addressing threats like climate change, landscape degradation, and the pollution. Support the capacity building initiatives in developing countries in strengthening the conservation efforts, enhance law enforcement capability, and empower the local communities. So, effective biodiversity conservation required the concerned effort at all the levels, from individual action in daily life to the community-based initiative and the global cooperation on the policy and research. Okay, by taking proactive steps to reduce the environmental impact, support local conservation effort, and advocate for the international collaboration, individual and communities can contribute significantly to prevent the biodiversity and ensuring a sustainable future for our planet. Each action, no matter how small, contribute to the larger goal of the protecting Earth ecosystem and the diversity of the life they sustain. So, if you're going to the conclusion part in preserving the biodiversity for the future generation, biodiversity is the intricate web on the life on the earth, which consists of the variety of species, genetic diversity with species, and the diverse ecosystem that supports life. It plays a fundamental role in the providing the ecosystem services essential for the human well-being, including the food security, clean air and water, climate regulations, cultural enrichment. However, the biodiversity faces the um, threats which is driven by the human activities such as the habitat destructions, climate change, population, pollution, over exploitations, and introduction of the invasive species. Okay, so conservation strategies are crucial for mitigating these threats and preserving the biodiversity. In that, protected area and the habitat restoration, establish and effectively managing the protected area, national park, marine reserve to safeguard the critical habitat and the biodiversity hotspot. In sustainable practices, promoting the sustainable agriculture, forestry, fisheries, and urban planning to minimize the ecological footprint and preserve the natural resources. Okay, policy and legislation in that enforcing the environmental laws, supporting the international agreement like CPD and CITIS, and integrating the biodiversity consideration into development policies. Okay, empowering the local communities through education, sustainable livelihood, and participatory conservation efforts. And the last one is research and monitoring, advancing the scientific knowledge, monitoring species population, and assessing the ecosystem health to inform evidence based conservation actions. Together, we have the power to make a significant difference in preserving the biodiversity for the future generation. By taking the individual action in our daily life, supporting the local conservation efforts, and advocating for the global cooperation for policy change, we can protect Earth-rich biodiversity and ensure a sustainable future. Each person contribute, no matter how small, contribute to the collective efforts to conserve the ecosystem, protect the endangered species, and maintain the natural balance essential for the life of our planet. So, this is for today's video. Thank you.